My name is Lily Anderson, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down not once, but twice. The first time I was just a little girl, not even 10 years old. If someone were to ask me, I'd say that was the day my entire world collapsed in the blink of an eye. It all began on a cold winter night, a fateful night that forever changed my life and my family's. I was born and raised in a small suburban town in Oregon. My family wasn't wealthy, but we lived happily together. My father, Robert Anderson, was a well-known local journalist, passionate about writing investigative reports on community issues. My mother, Sarah Anderson, was a dedicated nurse, always busy but never too busy to spend time with my father and me. The evenings we spent together watching movies and sharing funny stories were the most cherished memories of my childhood. On the day my life changed, my parents were attending an evening banquet to honor my father's contributions to journalism. I stayed home with my grandmother, who was known for cooking the most delicious meals and telling me fairy tales whenever my parents were away. That night, we were watching an old cartoon when the phone suddenly rang. I didn't understand why, but when I saw my grandmother's face turn pale and heard her muffled sobs over the phone, I knew something terrible had happened. We received the devastating news that my mother had died on the spot in a car accident. A drunk driver had lost control and crashed head-on into my parents' car on the highway. My father miraculously survived but was severely injured. His legs were crushed so badly that the doctors concluded he would never be able to walk again. I couldn't fully comprehend what was happening at the time. When I saw my father in the hospital, he lay motionless on the bed, his face gaunt and filled with pain. "Lily, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his hoarse voice barely audible as his trembling hand reached for mine. I didn't understand why he was apologizing. The accident wasn't his fault. But as I grew older, I realized that his apology wasn't for the accident itself. It was for the losses and hardships he knew I would face. He felt guilty for not being able to be the father he once was. However, my father, Robert Anderson, was far more resilient than he gave himself credit for. As soon as he was discharged from the hospital and adapted to life in a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He began writing sharper and more impactful articles than ever before, using his pen to combat both physical and emotional pain. His writing became a voice for the underprivileged, making him a respected figure in our small town. Although life was no longer the same, my father did his best to give me a fulfilling childhood. We spent many evenings rewatching my mother's favorite movies, debating books, and working on my homework together. Through these small, everyday moments, he instilled in me an invisible strength to keep moving forward. Yet deep inside there was always an emptiness that nothing could fill, the void left by the mother I had lost forever. Life gradually settled into a new routine after the tragedy, but the weight of loss still pressed heavily on both my father and me. He became a completely different man. Not one broken by grief, but a silent warrior who battled his pain every day. Once he adjusted to life in a wheelchair, he poured all his energy into his work as a journalist. His articles became sharper and more impactful, addressing deep social issues and earning him greater respect in the community than ever before. Despite his busy schedule, my father never forgot to care for me. He often encouraged me to join school clubs and make new friends, but truthfully, I preferred spending time at home with him. We had many evenings watching old films together. He would share stories of his past assignments, and sometimes we'd engage in lively debates about famous authors. Through his guidance, I learned to face challenges with both determination and clarity. When I turned 18, my father suggested that I apply to a university far from home. At first I hesitated. I didn't want to leave him alone. But he was insistent. "You need to spread your wings, Lily. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine," he told me, his eyes serious yet filled with love. Eventually I chose to major in finance at Washington State University, more than 200 miles away from home. The first few weeks were tough. I called my father regularly to keep him updated about everything: schoolwork, campus life, even the strange new food options at the cafeteria. He always encouraged me to keep going and to enjoy my college years. At school, I met Rachel Morgan, a strong and outgoing girl who quickly became my best friend. Rachel helped me adjust to student life, introducing me to club events and weekend trips. She was also the one who introduced me to her cousin, Ethan Hayes, a young man working in logistics transportation. Ethan had a warm smile and eyes that made people feel safe, He wasn't awkward or distant when I shared my family's situation. Instead, he opened up about his own hardships, explaining how he and his siblings grew up without their mother, who had passed away early in his life, and how their father had worked tirelessly to support them. When Ethan met my father for the first time, I was astonished at how naturally they bonded. They immediately hit it off, discussing classic rock music as if they had known each other for years. Watching them, I felt a deep sense of relief. Ethan didn't just understand my circumstances. He truly appreciated and respected my family. After graduation, I secured a job at a financial consulting firm in Seattle. By then, Ethan had settled into his role, managing a trucking team. Despite his hectic schedule, he often made time to visit me. 2 years passed in a blur of happiness. One crisp autumn day, Ethan took me to the park where we had our first date. There, he knelt down, looking at me with eyes full of hope. "Lily, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" I burst into tears of joy and said yes without hesitation. But there was something I needed to tell him before we moved forward with marriage. "Eva and I can't leave my father, he needs me," I said, watching him nervously, afraid he might hesitate. Instead, Ethan smiled softly and replied, "I've known that all along, and I would never ask you to do otherwise. We'll live together and take care of him. Together." With Ethan, I knew I wouldn't have to face life alone anymore. Beautiful days lay ahead, though somewhere deep inside, I still had a lingering sense that life's storms hadn't fully passed. Our wedding took place on a gorgeous autumn afternoon at a small church outside of Seattle. It was a simple but intimate ceremony, attended by close family, friends, and loved ones. My father, despite being in a wheelchair, insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. When he held my hand and smiled, I saw his eyes shine with pride. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as everyone witnessed that emotional moment. After the wedding, Ethan and I moved in with my father at our spacious apartment. Life seemed to settle into a peaceful rhythm. Ethan often traveled for work, but whenever he was home, he devoted all his time to our family. In the evenings, we would have dinner together, sharing stories about our day and discussing future plans. For the first time in years, I felt as though I had finally found complete happiness after all the pain and loss. However, things didn't go entirely smoothly. From the very first meeting, my mother-in-law, Linda Hayes, made it clear that she didn't fully accept me. She was a conservative woman who valued social status. She wasn't pleased to learn that my father was in a wheelchair, or that I didn't come from a wealthy family. Throughout that first encounter, she kept scrutinizing me with a critical gaze and asking questions that made me uncomfortable. "So, your father is in a wheelchair?" she asked, her lips pressed tightly together, as though she had just heard something unacceptable. "Yes, but he's a highly respected journalist," I replied, doing my best to remain calm. "A journalist," she muttered, her tone suggesting she didn't think much of the profession. I immediately sensed her distance and prejudice. Ethan's younger sister, Madison, wasn't any better. She gave me cold, dismissive looks and avoided any meaningful conversation with me. Whenever they visited, the atmosphere in the house would become tense. They barely acknowledged my father's presence and sometimes made sarcastic remarks. One evening during dinner, Linda casually made a comment, laced with insinuation. "Ethan, you have such a promising future. You should have married someone from a more well-off family. It would have made your career development much easier." I felt my face flush with both embarrassment and anger, but before I could respond, Ethan spoke up. "I don't need anyone but Lily. We are a family now, and that's what matters most," he said firmly. Ethan's words silenced Linda, though the icy look in her eyes remained. Madison shot her mother a sly glance and smirked. I forced a polite smile but felt a bitter sting inside. Their words were like invisible daggers, cutting deep into my confidence. Later that evening, Ethan held me close and said, "I know you've been through a lot. I'm sorry that Mom and Madison made you feel this way. Don't worry, I'll always stand by you." His words comforted me somewhat, but I knew these conflicts wouldn't disappear overnight. Linda and Madison continued to visit frequently, especially when Ethan was away. They inspected every corner of our apartment and made snide remarks, as if to emphasize that I wasn't good enough to be part of their family. One day, while I was tidying up in the kitchen, I overheard a conversation between them. "It's such a shame. Ethan could have done so much better," Linda said. "Exactly," Madison replied. "He's a fool for getting involved with someone like Lily. And her father? In a wheelchair? How embarrassing." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I bit my lip and held back my tears. I knew I couldn't let them see my vulnerability. This was just the beginning of the challenges I would have to face. After months of searching, Ethan and I finally bought a charming little house in the suburbs of Spokane. The house had a spacious backyard where I imagined planting a flower garden and a vegetable patch for my father. Ethan particularly loved the open kitchen, saying he wanted to cook with me whenever he had free time. The move went smoothly, and within a few weeks we began to feel the warmth and comfort of our new home. Ethan continued managing his transportation fleet. His job became increasingly demanding, requiring frequent business trips. Whenever he was away, I reminded myself to stay strong and keep our family stable. I worked hard at my financial consulting firm during the day and spent my evenings caring for my father. We maintained our old routines, watching movies, reading, and having dinner together. Despite Ethan's frequent absences, whenever he returned, he brought warmth and laughter that filled the house with happiness. But life always has unexpected challenges. One early winter morning, as I was getting ready for work, my phone rang. On the other end was a deep, serious male voice. "Hello, Mrs. Anderson, this is Lieutenant Martin from the Washington State Police Department. I'm very sorry to inform you that your husband, Ethan Hayes, has been involved in a serious accident on the highway." My heart stopped. I held my breath, trying to listen to his next words. Phrases like, head-on collision, severe injuries, and didn't make it echoed in my mind. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My hand trembled as I ended the call. Once again, my world came crashing down. In a daze, I called my father. The moment he heard my tearful voice, he knew something was wrong. He comforted me, urging me to stay strong, just as my mother had once been. The days that followed were a blur. Ethan's funeral was held at the same church where we had been married. Many people from the town, his colleagues and friends, attended, but Linda and Madison were noticeably absent. After the service, I clutched my father's hand tightly as we walked toward the car. On the drive home, a hollow emptiness consumed me. The house that had once been full of hope now felt colder and lonelier than ever. I tried to push through my grief by focusing on handling the paperwork for Ethan's estate and insurance. But before long, Linda and Madison suddenly showed up unannounced. They walked into the house as if they owned the place. Linda wore a fake, friendly smile, but her eyes revealed her true intentions. "Lily, we understand that life is going to be much harder for you without Ethan," she said smoothly. "So we think it's best for you to sell this house and move back in with your father." I struggled to remain calm, though anger was boiling inside me. Madison added with a mocking tone, "Exactly, you don't need such a big house anymore. We'll help you pack everything up." "Get out of here right now," I said firmly, my voice steady. "This house was bought by Ethan and me. It's mine, not yours." Linda froze at my firmness. She was about to argue but realized that I wasn't easy to intimidate. Madison tugged on her arm and whispered something in her ear. Finally, they quietly left, but not before throwing one last warning. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer soon." I shut the door, sank into a chair, and took a deep breath. The anger inside me slowly subsided, replaced by a strong resolve to protect everything Ethan and I had built together. Though I had lost the man I loved, I knew I couldn't afford to be weak. I still had my father and the dream of a family that we had once cherished, even if it now only existed in memories. Just a week after Ethan's funeral, I received a call from James Walker, a lawyer representing Linda and Madison. His voice was polite, yet carried an undertone of unpleasant formality. "Mrs. Anderson, I have been authorized by Mrs. Linda Hayes to discuss her claims regarding Mr. Ethan Hayes' estate. She believes that she and her family have a right to part of the property you currently own." I took a deep breath to stay calm. "Mr. Walker, this house belongs to me. Ethan and I bought it together. Besides, none of them even attended his funeral. I don't believe they have any right to make such a demand." There was a brief pause before he responded. "I suggest that you meet with us to negotiate before this situation escalates further." I ended the call, my heart filled with both anger and anxiety. The audacity they had to make such a claim so soon after Ethan's death was infuriating. I decided to consult my own lawyer to defend my rights. The next day, I sat down with Amanda Reed, a sharp and dedicated attorney. She listened attentively to my story and nodded thoughtfully. "Lily, did Ethan leave a will?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, we never discussed it." Amanda pondered for a moment. "We'll need to investigate. If Ethan did leave a will, it will make things much simpler. If not, we can still prove that the house is jointly owned by you and Ethan, unrelated to his family." A few days later I received unexpectedly good news. Ethan had, in fact, met with a lawyer 6 months earlier to draft a will. I was invited to the law office to hear it read. That morning I brought my father along with me. As lawyer Matthew Hayes opened the file, I held my breath. He began to read the will with a solemn tone. I, Ethan Hayes, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my possessions, including our home, vehicles, and savings, to my beloved wife, Lily Anderson Hayes. It is my wish that she uses these resources to care for my father-in-law, Robert Anderson, whom I have come to love as my own father. I felt tears streaming down my face. Even though Ethan was no longer in this world, he had still thought of me and my father. Mr. Hayes handed me a handwritten letter from Ethan. As I opened it, I couldn't hold back the flood of emotions. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, the worst has happened. I'm sorry for leaving you alone, but I want you to know that you are never truly alone. You and your father are my real family. I did everything I could to protect both of you. Keep living, stay strong, and find happiness. Just like you promised me, I will always be watching over you. Love, Ethan. I broke down sobbing as my father gently placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes red with tears as well. That afternoon, Linda and Madison unexpectedly appeared at my doorstep. They no longer had their usual air of confidence and instead looked somewhat hesitant. Linda forced a smile, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Lily, we need to talk about Ethan's estate. I think we should find a reasonable solution that works for everyone. I crossed my arms over my chest and looked directly at her. There's no need, Mrs. Linda. Ethan left everything to me legally and clearly. This is my house. You have no rights here. Madison glared at me and whispered angrily into her mother's ear. Linda, however, continued her pleading tone. We're Ethan's family. Are you really going to cut us off like this? I sighed, feeling that this conversation was pointless. Ethan made his decision about who his family is. Now please leave my house, or I'll have to call the police. Finally they left reluctantly. I stood at the door, watching their car disappear down the street. I felt a sense of relief but also a renewed determination. I had reclaimed peace for myself and my father, but I knew this was only the beginning of new challenges ahead. No matter what, I would not let anyone destroy what Ethan had left for me. A few weeks after resolving the disputes with my in-laws, I received a notification from the insurance company. Ethan's life insurance policy had been approved. Amanda Reed, my lawyer, called to give me the details. Lily, the payout is enough to completely pay off your mortgage and still leave you with a substantial amount. I recommend using this money to secure your life and invest in your future, she advised. I sat in silence for a long moment, trying to process her words. Ethan had always looked out for me, even in ways I hadn't been aware of. With this insurance money, the financial burden on my father and me was lifted. I decided to pay off the entire mortgage, ensuring that this house would always remain a safe haven for us. In the days that followed, I focused on reorganizing my life. One afternoon, while tidying up Ethan's desk, I stumbled upon a small notebook hidden beneath a stack of papers. The cover was worn, but inside were familiar handwritten entries. It was Ethan's journal, filled with his thoughts, dreams, and plans for our future together. Every page was filled with love and hope. Some lines made my heart tighten. Want to build a family with Lily. Maybe start a savings fund so our future kids can have the best start in life. I couldn't stop the tears as I continued reading other entries about our home, the garden, and evenings spent together as a family. Ethan had dreamed of such a future for us. But now, all I had were memories and these journal pages to hold on to his presence. That night I lay awake, unable to sleep. My mind kept circling around the unfinished plans Ethan had made. It wasn't until early morning that I finally drifted off. In my dream, I saw him standing there, smiling gently as he always did. Lily, everything is going to be all right, he whispered. When I woke up, I felt an unusual sense of peace, but it was soon interrupted by a wave of nausea. I rushed to the bathroom, trying to steady myself, but the feeling didn't go away. The nausea persisted for several days, making it impossible to ignore. A thought crossed my mind. Could it be? I went to a nearby pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. The 3-minute wait felt like an eternity. When I finally looked at the result, 2 blue lines appeared clearly on the test. I froze, sinking onto the bathroom floor as a flood of emotions overwhelmed me. Joy, fear, grief, and finally, hope. "Dad?" I whispered as I stepped out of the room, tears still streaming down my face. My father, who was sitting and reading the newspaper, immediately noticed something was wrong. He put the paper down and asked with concern, "Lily, what's the matter?" I held up the test with trembling hands. I'm pregnant, Dad," I choked out. He stood up slowly, walked over to me and wrapped his arms around me tightly. "Lily, this is a miracle. You're not alone anymore. This child is a gift from Ethan." His words pulled me out of my initial fear. Ethan had left me more than just memories. He had given me a piece of himself, a new life growing inside me. I wiped my tears and nodded. "You're right, Dad. We'll be okay. I'll take care of this baby and protect it, just like Ethan always protected me." That entire afternoon we sat together and talked about plans for the future. I knew then that I had found the strength to move forward. Though Ethan was no longer by my side, he remained present in every heartbeat of the new life I was about to begin. One afternoon, as I was tending to the garden in the backyard, the doorbell rang repeatedly. I walked to the front of the house and immediately recognized Linda and Madison's car parked by the curb. A sense of caution rose within me. This wasn't the first time they had shown up unannounced, but after everything that had happened, I knew this visit wouldn't be simple. Linda stood on the porch, attempting to look friendly. Madison stood beside her, her eyes darting around as if she were inspecting everything. I walked slowly to the door, trying to stay calm. "Lily, we need to talk," Linda said, her voice sickly sweet. "I don't think there's anything left for us to discuss, Linda," I replied, showing no sign of friendliness. She gave a forced smile and took a step closer. We're going through some difficulties. Madison's company just went bankrupt and I'm facing financial troubles. We need a place to stay temporarily. I was thinking your father's old apartment might still be available." I felt my blood boil. These were the same people who had tried to push me out of my own home, and now they had the audacity to ask for help? I took a deep breath and replied in a calm but firm tone. "Sorry, but that's not possible. I don't want any further connection with either of you." Madison frowned and stepped forward. "You're so petty, Lily. We're Ethan's family. You can't just cut us off like this." I raised an eyebrow, meeting her gaze steadily. "Ethan's family? You didn't even bother to attend his funeral. Don't talk to me about family." Linda's expression shifted as she realized that pleading wouldn't work. She exhaled sharply, dropping the pretense of friendliness. Her eyes hardened as she spoke in a cold, spiteful tone. "Who do you think you are? Your husband hasn't been gone that long and you're already living so comfortably, and look at your stomach. You've already found someone else, haven't you? Disgusting." Her words were like a knife to my heart, but I didn't let my emotions show. I stood tall and smiled softly but with resolve. "My personal life is none of your business. I think this conversation is over. Please leave my house immediately." Madison looked ready to argue, but Linda grabbed her arm. Perhaps she realized that she couldn't win this confrontation. She stared at me for a long moment before saying bitterly, "Fine, Lily, but you'll regret turning your back on us." I didn't respond, standing silently as they turned and walked down the steps. When their car finally drove away, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. At last I had set firm boundaries for myself and my family. They no longer had the power to hurt me or the child growing inside me. That evening, as I sat at the dinner table with my father, I recounted everything that had happened. He listened carefully, then placed his hand over mine, his eyes full of pride. "You did the right thing, Lily. Sometimes cutting off toxic people is necessary to protect yourself and the ones you love." I gave a slight nod. From now on, I would focus on my future and the baby I was expecting. My life had been filled with loss, but I wouldn't let anyone stand in the way of the happiness I was building. Ethan had given me strength, and I would use that strength to protect my little family. As time passed, the pain of grief began to fade, making room for new hope in my life and my father's. My belly grew larger, and each day, I could feel the life inside me. A piece of Ethan. The precious gift he had left behind. Every gentle kick reminded me that I needed to keep moving forward, stronger and happier, not just for myself, but for our child. My father stood by me during these important moments. He often helped me tend to the small garden behind our house, where we planted vegetables and flowers just as Ethan and I had once planned. He would smile gently and say, "Before you know it, that little one will be running all over this garden. You'll have your hands full chasing after them." Those words always made me laugh. The image didn't feel so distant anymore. Sometimes I would imagine the day I'd hold my child in my arms, introducing them to my father and telling them about the great man who had been their father. I began preparing everything for the baby's arrival. With help from Rachel, my best friend from college, I transformed the spare room near my bedroom into a cozy nursery. The walls were painted a soft, calming shade of blue, and I hung a few paintings I had created during my free time. The small crib that Ethan had promised to assemble was now completed by my father in his place. Each time I looked at the nursery, I felt both joy and an ache in my heart. Ethan should have been here, helping me with all of this. But I knew that, though he was no longer physically present, his love remained in every aspect of my life and our child's. One late spring afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the trees in the garden, I felt the first contractions. My father quickly called an ambulance and took me to the hospital. It was a period of intense anxiety and pain, but I never felt alone. I knew Ethan was watching over me from somewhere far away, and my father was by my side, holding my hand through every difficult moment. After many hours of labor, I finally heard the first cries of my baby. It was a boy, healthy and full of life. A nurse brought him to me and gently placed him in my arms. I looked into his tiny eyes that resembled Ethan's so much it took my breath away. Overwhelmed by emotion, I whispered, "Welcome to the world, Ethan Jr." My father stood beside me, his eyes red with tears of joy. "He looks just like his father," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. The days that followed were busy yet filled with happiness. My father and I took turns caring for Ethan Jr., and every moment with him felt like a renewal of my life. The pain of the past slowly faded, replaced by small daily joys. His first smile, his babbling attempts at words, and his wobbly first steps. One day, as I held Ethan Jr. in the garden, my father said something I would never forget. "Life has given us many challenges, but it hasn't forgotten to bless us with the most precious things. You've done it, Lily. You've rebuilt your life." I smiled and hugged my son tightly. "Yes, Dad. And I'll keep living for the people I love." The warm afternoon sun filtered through the trees, embracing the three of us. Though there would still be challenges ahead, I knew I had become strong enough to face them all. My life had changed, but now it was filled with love, hope, and wonder. Lily Anderson's story is a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the ability to overcome adversity. Despite facing loss and continuous challenges, she found hope through the child her late husband left behind. With support from her father and friends, Lily rebuilt her life, protecting her little family from negative influences. Her story reminds us that no matter how tough life gets, love and determination can lead to renewal and open the path to wonder and happiness. What are your thoughts on Lily Anderson's story and her journey to rediscover happiness? Share your opinions on the characters and the most memorable moments. Don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life and family.